Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wolf's first Women Speak webinar of 2022. We are planning to facilitate 4 webinars throughout the year, and each webinar will focus on one of our different focus areas. In case you're not familiar with Wolf, we are the Women's Liberation Front, and we are the United States' largest radical feminist, nonpartisan, nonprofit agency. And we spend a great deal of our time fighting against gender ideology and sex stereotypes, but we also have some other focus areas, including abolishing commercial sexual exploitation. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in tonight's webinar. I am very pleased to welcome the Reverend Dr. Marian Hatcher to be our first webinar presenter of 2022. She is a longtime colleague of mine, and I am so excited that I get to introduce you to her tonight. But before I introduce Dr. Hatcher, I wanted to give a big thank you to Amanda Howdeshell. Amanda is Wolf's events manager. She manages everything related to our events and our membership program and our volunteer program. And she is doing all the behind the scenes tech work for our webinar tonight. So thank you, Amanda. We are going to take questions at the end of the presentation. You can go ahead and submit your questions whenever you want to, and then I'll read them to Dr. Hatcher when we get to Q&A time. Please be sure to put your questions into the section called Q&A instead of the chat box. That just makes it easier for us to keep track of your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to this evening's speaker. The Reverend Dr. Marian Hatcher has worked as a civilian member of law enforcement for 15 years. She's currently on medical leave. In 2021, she became the co-founder of ALIVE, the Alliance of Leadership and Innovation for Victims of Exploitation. ALIVE is a Houston, Texas-based organization with a national platform. In addition, Dr. Hatcher is a U.S. representative of SPACE International. SPACE stands for Survivors of Prostitution Calling for Enlightenment. And SPACE International is a survivor-led organization representing 10 countries. Dr. Hatcher is a nationally recognized expert on combating the demand for sex trafficking, sitting on numerous boards and facilitating trainings on trafficking and prostitution for various law enforcement groups, including the FBI and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. She has traveled the country speaking at various events and conferences, shedding light on the prevalent issue of sex trafficking, as well as telling her own story as a survivor of sex trafficking and domestic violence. Dr. Hatcher has been featured in the Oprah Winfrey Network documentary, Prostitution, Leaving the Life, a Midwest Emmy-winning Inc. 180 documentary, Shared Hope International's Gang Trap series, Nicholas Kristof's A Path Appears, I Am Jane Doe, and most recently, The Trap and From Liberty to Captivity. She is a recipient of numerous awards, including the 2014 Shared Hope International Pathbreaker Award, which is presented to individuals who have dedicated themselves to tackling the demand that drives domestic minor sex trafficking. She was also awarded the 2016 Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award for volunteer service from President Obama. Dr. Hatcher received her BS from Loyola University in 1985, concentrating on finance. Her previous experiences include working at 3 major corporations. In August 2015, she received an honorary doctorate of divinity, ambassador at large, and chaplaincy from CICA International University and Seminary, which is an NGO in special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. In 2017, Dr. Hatcher was granted executive clemency by the Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner. And in 2018, she was honored on congressional record for Black history by US Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois. And as you can tell from me reading this very long and impressive bio, Reverend Dr. Hatcher has had a long and illustrious career committed to helping women. She is a hero of mine, and I respect and I appreciate her so much. So at this time, I'm delighted to turn the presentation over to the Reverend Dr. Hatcher, and you're going to have the opportunity to learn from her for the next hour or so. And again, if you have any questions you would like to ask her, go ahead and put those into the Q&A section, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Mari Irvine. I am just tickled to be able to collaborate with you again. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And for anybody that might miss this live, we also welcome those who will watch on YouTube later. So the first thing that I'd like to share with you is that I am a survivor leader, as the earlier part of my bio discusses. But I want you to understand what that means to me. Surviving is a term, the survivor, everybody's surviving from something. And so I don't want to use the term and forget about the other things. I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a recovering addict. I'll be celebrating 18 years clean the end of July this year. I'm a cancer survivor, 8 years. And so many other things. I have multiple sclerosis, which has progressed. That's why I'm still on medical leave. And, there's other things going on with me physically, but we're here to talk about surviving prostitution and sex trafficking. And so I want to just quickly say that surviving the sex trade, survivor leaders, we all look at this similarly, but some differently. And for me, I want to say very clearly and concisely that I am a survivor of both prostitution as well as a survivor of sex trafficking, because you can be in prostitution and not be trafficked, but all trafficking victims are involved in prostitution. Okay, and so that is my opinion. That's my very strong opinion. Tonight we're going to talk about 3 models, and it'll be pretty obvious which one I am an advocate for. I am a feminist abolitionist who happens to be also a member of the clergy. I'm a woman of God, and that's just for me. For me, I without God, I would not be here. There is no doubt, without God, I would not be here. I'm very grateful to have that opportunity, because even though I had loving and caring parents and a good upbringing, middle class upbringing, the stressors that lead one to have early on in their life, those tendencies toward over-sexualization, as happens so much among young Black people, being involved in stressful things early on in life. I think these are things that we don't talk about. So real quickly, before I get into the models, I just want to talk quickly about me as a guinea pig, so to speak, and just share a little bit more about my experience. So loving and caring parents, there's always that dysfunction that comes up in there, okay? No, there's no perfect families. I think if there's not a dysfunctional family, it's a dysfunctional family, because the essence of us as human beings is that we are not perfect. If we had all the answers, then we wouldn't be going to doctors, and we wouldn't be needing surgery, and we wouldn't be needing anxiety meds, and we wouldn't be needing this, and we wouldn't be needing that. But we are, at the core, we're relational. And so much of what happened for me early on was good relationships. But there was also, a great relationship with my mom, who I'm glad is able to share this night with me in the room. Great relationship to a certain extent with my dad, great relationships with aunts and so. But then there was that moment when I believe I was 7 years old, when I was molested by a cousin. And so that particular moment in my tapestry, for lack of a better word, was pivotal in shaping what would happen down the road when all of a sudden you have domestic violence. Now, this is after accomplishing many things and getting my degree, getting married, having children, having my first child, things like that. But when the crap hit the fan and I became a victim of domestic violence in a relationship further on, okay, what happened to me? What happened to me? Well, you put all of that trauma from the beatings, from the domestic violence, and being an overachiever and starting to spiral because you start seeing your credit score diving, you start seeing your tangible accomplishments start to disappear. You start seeing the pain of having a domestic situation where you're beaten and your family is threatened and your mother is assaulted by your husband and your oldest child has a gun put there. All of a sudden you're like, I can't do this. And for me, I've got a lot of survivor sisters that I'm very proud of, sisters, brothers, and others who did not run in the way that I did. They somehow maintained the ability to stay with their families, but I ran away, and I was missing for almost 2 years. And so my second chance, after 17 years in the corporate sector, doing some really cool stuff, 3 major corporations, all that good stuff, I ended up a fugitive, because in there somewhere, you stay out there long enough, you're going to get arrested. You got a drug habit now, you got crack cocaine habit, you're feeding your crack cocaine habit by prostituting yourself. Now you're easy pickings for a pimp, excuse me. And you guys know the story, right? Well, God loved me enough that I ended up in the jail-based treatment setting. And instead of doing 3 to 7 years in the penitentiary, I was blessed to have jail-based treatment 120 days inside the Cook County Department of Corrections. At that point, the program that I was in was the Department of Women's Justice Services integrated treatment program that addressed substance use disorder, mental health issues, and provided case management. Now, I was missing for 2 years, but so when I came back and contacted my family, I was blessed. When I walked out of the jail walls, my mom had bought me a coat. I had a cell phone waiting for me. My dad and 2 of my daughters, I think it was, picked me up. And so they were just waiting for me to surface. They didn't know for those years if I was one of those people that was, news at 11, a prostituted person found in a dumpster, right? And so they were glad to find out I was in jail. Well, I do want those who I advocate for and love, and do this work and feel responsible for, in terms of using my voice nowadays. I don't want them to have to go to jail to be able to get their chance, their opportunity for healthy choices and to live a fulfilled life, the one that their parents, unless their parents were, in an exploitive situation, the ones that most parents want for their families. So I got my second chance in jail, went to jail and got the case management that I needed to. It was minimally what I needed in terms of case management, because I had had my mom's home to come to, I had my father's, which is not the norm, I got the treatment that I needed and I did aftercare and all of that outside the jail walls. But I was an overachiever and a workaholic before. So I put those tendencies into making like an inordinate amount of Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Cocaine Anonymous meetings, and actually graduated the program that I was in. For many years, I was the earliest graduate. It was supposed to be after you did the 120, you're supposed to be on probation for, it's an 18-month program, 4 months inside the jail walls. And you could do 30, that would be half that time. You could do half that time inside the residential program, or you could do the other half on the Sheriff's furlough on the electronic monitor. I chose to stay in jail. And why was that? Because I had been missing for so long, and I was going to be going home to disappointed parents and angry children. And so I needed to get everything that I could. And I was in a place that made me safe. I felt very safe in jail compared to what I went through, rapes, beatings, sodomized. I mean, you name it. Almost left for dead, and some people didn't. Sometimes it was just a matter of just beating you. I was kidnapped one time. The guy just beat me in the back of a van for hours and hours and hours. Didn't want any sex. He just wanted to beat me. And so it's a horrific environment that's in plain sight that most people don't see. So just wanted to share a little bit about that part, but I got that second chance, and surprisingly, you know, a lot of people don't understand it. Surprisingly, for me, there was a reason behind it. I just feel like it was not a mistake. God used the opportunity for me to get what I needed to heal, start the process of healing with my family, but also to show me that this thing was bigger than me. Because one of the most selfish things that one can ever do is to just make their problem the biggest and most important thing and just say, I can't handle it. Drugs or not, you know, I walked away from my children. I walked away from my mom and dad, and, you know, just the circumstances just weren't cool. Well, you know, over the years, I was able to accomplish some pretty cool things, as anyone, you know, that heard the bio would be able to grab onto. But I think most importantly, for me, it became very clear that whatever I could do and should do, and was capable of doing to influence what the next step for another person who've been through what I'd been through, and in most cases been through much more, even though what I went through was pretty bad. But I, of course, met people who went through much more and for much longer. My period of time involved in this was very, very short. Now, I met generations of families. We have a grandmother, mother, and a daughter all in the program at the same time at the jail, sometimes. And women 70 years old who this is all they have ever known, 40, 50 years or longer, you know, if their exploitation and abuse began when they were under the age of 10. I've had 8 or 9-year-olds that I had to support in a journey from Ohio that ended up here in Chicago, and it was familial trafficking. And so just kind of throwing a few tidbits out there. These things became very dear to my heart, to be able to take the blessing that I was receiving and that new chance. And, you know, when you're a workaholic by nature, you know, the more you're given an opportunity to do these things, you're going to do it because you're going to throw your all in there. And of course, I forgot about me. That's another story. We might talk about that later. But most importantly, I have been given an opportunity to meet people I never expected to meet, to call people friend, colleague, family. Very, very surreal, some of the people that I have met and some of the honors that I have been afforded and some of the designations that I carry now, just unexpected and beautiful, just beautiful. When I look at and I guess the word tonight is tapestry of my life, because I'm starting, I'm 60 now. And so I'm starting to really appreciate the things that you didn't appreciate while they were going on when you were younger. Like I'm a grandmother now, so I see the things as a grandmother that I didn't appreciate as a mother because you're busy trying to achieve, those things. But as a grandparent, you get the opportunity to really savor looking at your offspring and their children, and really knowing how precious it is. And so what world do I want to leave for my children and my grandchildren? And my mother and father, I'm blessed to have both my mom and dad still with me. My dad's 83, my mother will be 83 next month, which is coming on pretty quickly, April 13th. And so, is that right? Yeah, that's right. And so, anyway, the opportunity to know, to be with presidents and I got the opportunity to tell President Jimmy Carter, before I was granted executive clemency by former Governor Bruce Rauner, I got the opportunity to tell President Carter at the Carter Center, I've been a good girl. I've been good for, at that point, I think it was 9 years or something that I had been clean and working, at the sheriff's office and doing different things. And I meant it from my heart. It's like, I should not be a felon at this point. At some point, this is not right. Even though I was given that second chance, and I worked for 13 years at the sheriff's office before I got executive clemency. That's not the norm, obviously. And that's part of the reason why it's such a responsibility, because I was a convicted felon working at the Cook County Sheriff's Office and doing things that one would not expect. But the sheriff is a visionary, humanitarian, and he believed in letting a person's second chance be exactly that. So just laying a little of that personal foundation for you. Over the years, I've gotten the opportunity not only to influence programming and policy, but also to work with allies and other survivor leaders when it came down to the push for full decriminalization, legalization, things like that. What does that look like? I started off with that experience with Ambassador Swanee Hunt and Demand Abolition some years ago. I think it was 2005, maybe more than a decade. Absolutely life-changing experience, because what was the groundwork that was laid for me there, I started looking at the business model that is human trafficking from the demand, through the demand lens. Because this is a business model. We're talking about money. It's all about the money. And with that said, demand fuels the sex trade, right? No demand, no problem. No buyers, no business. I mean, it's cliche, but it's a fact. I'll give you an example. It's my Twinkie example. I'm old enough to have had a Twinkie in my lunchbox going to school. And surprisingly, one day, I think it was Hostess Company or whatever, was going out of business, and there was, oh my God, there was no Twinkies. What's that about? Well, guess what? The whole world lost its mind and said, we can't live without Twinkies. Are you serious? Oh my goodness. Oh, you see how fast they put those Twinkies back? It was like the next month, Twinkies were back. I don't know who put them back. I don't know who bought what stuff. The Twinkies are back. Okay? Because of what? demand. So I started looking at the entire business model of, I mean, obviously, you know, working in the environment that I got my second chance, systemic solutions to dealing with, you know, the victim-centered service provision, that was, of course, very important. But the opportunity to look at how we could impact demand became kind of my mantra, to the point where they nicknamed me the John Slayer, because I had the privilege of coordinating large-scale sex fire sting operation on behalf of the sheriff and his office. And so with that said, I somewhere in there went from being, you know, that person that I described, you know, 3 major corporations, and then you have this fall from grace and you end up on crack cocaine and, you know, prostituted, and it's, you know, just really strange experience. But one day I found myself with presidents and ambassadors and congressmen and congresswomen and senators, and I was like, okay, but it wasn't about me. It was about me sharing the experience, not the horrors of the experience, but the experience in terms of the brokenness, the systemic violence, the systemic racism, and all of the isms and all of those things that we know don't work right, and how they impact the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable among us are the ones who we're talking about tonight, right? The most vulnerable are those who are easy pickings for the exploiter, whether it be the buyer, the brothel owner, the pimp trafficker. And so just want to go through the models, and I'll throw in a few thoughts with them. And if you want to look for more information, you know, about these things, you know, everything's available at the touch of you know, your keyboard. But I want to present this from the experience, from my point of view, from the experience that I have had. If I change your mind, or if I educate you, God bless you. I hope that I do. But this is the plant a seed. You don't have to agree with me tonight. You don't have to agree with me tomorrow. But think about your children, what you want for them, not what you think is okay for someone else to do. Think about yourself. Are you willing? Because I've given some people this, you know, are you willing to sell yourself tonight on the streets of whatever city or state you live in? So let's start with that. This is the opportunity for you to say, yep, sounds good to me. I'm going to leave my job at such and such, and I'm going to go outside and figure this thing out and start selling myself. Or I'm going to go online and post an ad and I'm going to start selling myself. Give up my day job, and this is what I'm going to do. Now, don't get me wrong. If for those people who do that without exploitation and feel like they are have found their niche, God bless you. But statistics tell us that that is not the majority. The majority, that's why I'm considered a survivor leader. I was never a sex worker. That term, you know, turns my stomach. I was prostituted, because you know, being a prostitute makes it, it's not a noun. It's just, it's not a job. It's not an occupation. There's nobody watching me right now, or whoever will watch later, that at 7 years old said, I want to be called a hoe when I grow up. I want to be out there selling my body. That's all I want to do. That's all I want to do. When I grow up at 7 years old, this is what I want to do. I want to be a person that people look down on because they are down on their luck, have children that they're trying to feed. And that's going to be the way that I meet my basic needs. At 7 years old, they want to be teachers and doctors and lawyers and pilots and garbage truck drivers and, you know, and things like that. So the first model we're going to talk about is full decriminalization. And full decriminalization is basically a human rights model. And their concern in that model is that you're criminalizing an adult doing something voluntary, and it's consensual sex work. The exchange of sexual services, and that should be okay. The person should have the human right to personal autonomy and privacy, and that the government shouldn't tell them what to do with their body. And, you know, the harm reduction model, you know, people talk about, you know, making sure that people are safe in terms of, okay, everybody that's involved in the sex trade should use condoms. There's no doubt about that. But the other argument is that it exposes those involved to criminal abuse, excuse me, by law enforcement, things like that, and that they're somehow not safe and can't go to law enforcement for help because they're part of the problem. Well, that was never my experience, and I'm sure that that is some individual's experience. That was never my experience. But the argument that is also included is that it somehow makes you more vulnerable to violence, you know, more vulnerable to rape, beatings, murder. And the other thought, you know, is that somehow, whether it be on the street or online, that somehow being involved in the sex trade, you're forced to be in more unsafe environments, and that the system is set up for failure, and that in order to live their best life, and, you know, the best model is to fully decriminalize the sex trade, which means that there is no way for law enforcement there would be no statutorial enforcement of any law, not just the seller of sex, who most of the time statistically is there because of some vulnerability, right? But also we're going to let the buyer off the hook, the brothel owner, and the pimp and trafficker. Now, the problem I have with this particular model is that, and as we continue to go, all that sounds real good, but you cannot fully decriminalize the violence out of the sex trade. You just can't. It's there. It's a part of the experience for many buyers. The fact that they feel like once that money has changed hands, whether it be, you know, with the prostituted person or with the pimp or trafficker, that they can pretty much do anything that they want. And it's, you know, if you look at Go to Demand Abolition's website, there's lots of research that shows that these things are true. There's also research that shows, I mean, they want to pay more money, you know, for no condom. There's all of these things, you know, if you can give me more money, or if they're younger, or if they're this, or if they're that, you know, they'll pay more money. Once the money is paid, they feel that they can do anything. Okay. And so that's the problem. That's the biggest problem I have with all of this. I mean, whether you believe it or not, you cannot legislate, you cannot not legislate the violence out of the sex trade. Just not going to happen. And I'm probably not the best person to talk about, many people's experiences with a lot of the negativity about law enforcement. And so we got to protect people from law enforcement, because my second life was in law enforcement as a civilian. And so, I didn't have a problem with police in that vein, but some people do. But guess what? They do a lot of good. They've saved a lot of lives. And we just have to be fair. We have to be fair. There are going to be bad people in all disciplines. Let's remember that. Next, we're going to talk about the legalization. That was full decrim. We kind of went over that briefly. The legalization, if you want an example in this country, it would be the more than 50-year failed Petri dish experiment in the brothels in Nevada. There are a few counties in Nevada that have the brothels, and so that's where there's legalization, and they take their cut in the brothel. And supposedly, it's supposed to be safer. But guess what? There's increased organized crime. There's increased child sex trafficking. One of the things that nobody thinks about is that there is always going to be, one of the things that I learned in my experience as a civilian in law enforcement, is that there are other crimes associated with the buying of sex, people trying to buy sex. There's also narcotics charges when these takedowns occur. There are weapons charges. There's child endangerment. I've had situations where many children were at risk while their fathers were out trying to buy a human being. They would leave them in the car or have them in the car with them. I've had him as young as 6 months old, in my experience, being in the car and loaded weapons, all kinds of things like that. There's kidnapping, just to name a few. There's thousands and thousands of charges that, I've seen involved that are connected to what's supposed to be the victimless crime, the simple act of trying to buy sex. All right. So with that said, the legalization is supposed to provide a person a regulatory structure where they would pay taxes, this whole thing, pay taxes, and somehow it's going to make the violent and exploitive industry safer. Doesn't happen. Does not happen. Okay. As I said, there's increased organized crime, increased trafficking, period, and increased trafficking of children as well. So while we're talking about giving people, their human, we want to make sure everybody's enjoying their human rights. Our rights can't be enjoyed at the expense of others, and we don't make policy at the expense of others. We've got to look at the majority. And we have the statistics. People talk about we don't have statistics for sex trafficking, prostitution. There is really good data out there. really good data out there. There's a lot of garbage data on the flip side, but there's good data for the argument that I'm making right now. Now, a lot of people talk about, you know, the ownership of their own body and doing what they want to do, but the most of the people that are involved in this, in the sex trade, are in it because of a vulnerability, such as homelessness, as I touched on earlier. Homelessness, poverty, lack of education. And it's extremely important to keep that in mind. How can a person truly have agency if they don't have, if you have these vulnerabilities that are forcing you to make bad decisions, make the only decision that's available to you, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I can't remember the specific data that I use in terms of this percentage, but we can always provide it to you guys later, put it on the website. 88%, excuse me, 88% is in the area of those who have at some point in the continuum of their experiencing trafficking, prostitution and trafficking, had an exploiter. Okay, they may not have one today, they might not have one yesterday or tomorrow, but at some point in their experience in the sex trade, they have had someone benefiting from the sale of their body. Okay, and I will definitely get that that research to Mari, unless she knows which one I'm talking about. And this is a consensus of a number of abolitionists, researchers, excuse me, and survivor leaders that have agreed upon this. And so we have to look at it through the lens of those who are most impacted. And guess what? Those who are most impacted disproportionately, Black and brown women and girls. Why? Vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities. Statistics show you. The FBI statistics coming out of your eyeballs. If you look at our website for Alive, and we will get that to you. I don't know if Amanda or Mari can drop that information in my website for my organization. We have some really good data on that as well. Juveniles being arrested in states that have a safe harbor law, still, they're children. If we want to talk about those who want to do it, okay, let's stop talking about them, you know, the adults for a minute. Let's remember that children turn into youngsters and youngsters turn into adults. So 18th birthday does not stop your journey. And there is no epiphany at the midnight on your 18th birthday that says that somehow you got it all together and you made all those decisions on your own in the blink of an eye. It's a process, it's a journey. Your exploitation started as a minor, which we know that statistically somewhere between the age of 12 and 15, is still that average for entering the sex trade. And I think under the age of 21, 63%, I think it's 63%, said they entered the sex trade under the age of 21. And so, yeah, let's talk about the young folks. We have people throwing around these terms, child prostitute, which is horrific. We have people who are upset with the law, Foster Sesta, that was passed simply to hold bad actors accountable. third-party bad actors accountable for exploiting online and allowing, for the first time, those victims to seek civil remedy. And people who have not read the law have a lot to say about it. People have a lot to say about the fact that it's been used once successfully. That's because that was the opportune moment for it to be used successfully. And it's going to gain traction as more and more things come out in many, many other lawsuits connected, like what's going on with Pornhub and what organizations like Nikosi are doing and others. So we talk about what does it really look like? What should actually, thank you for dropping all these links in, this is perfect. Yes, Melissa Farley has excellent research on that. And so we're talking about what model, you're like, okay, Marian, you're preaching all this stuff. I mean, what do you think? What exactly do you think? And guys, remember to put your questions in the Q&A and not the chat. What are you thinking, Marian? So, okay, we're gonna agree to disagree, or we're gonna agree and agree, or we're gonna just think you're full of crap. Well, what I have passionately been a part of with many allies, started particularly with World Without Exploitation, Coalition Against Trafficking Women, and many. I shouldn't even get started naming them, but there's so many. And the equality model is the name that, and there's a website, equality model website. It's good information from the equality model New York website. But let's just think about this logically. I don't think anybody wants the person who is either selling because of survival or being sold because of survival, selling sex for whatever vulnerability. Statistically, the majority are because of vulnerabilities, to be further victimized by being arrested and held accountable in some ridiculous way for their own victimization, right? So why don't we decriminalize the seller? That makes sense. But how do you really decide that you're going to? Now, my experience personally, the violence that I experienced was at the hand of the buyer. I was beaten by buyers. I was raped by buyers, sodomized by buyers. Only at the end of my experience did I have minor physical contact, that was negative with the pimp. I was abused in the violent and exploitive industry, trade, I hate the industry, sex trade, by the buyer. Okay, that's just me. I know I'm not everybody, I'm me. So let's do this. Let's repeal the laws that arrest and incarcerate the people in prostitution, and make sure that they get exit services, comprehensive social services, exit services, so that they, when they're ready, we're not going to force anybody to do this. They need to be able to be ready, because part of the problem is they've always had somebody making a decision for them. right? So when they're ready, and many are ready under the right circumstances, to do that. And there's a lot of research that shows that in many, many countries. I know, pretty sure Melissa Farley, it was either 8 countries, 7 or 8 countries, where they did research showing the very high percentage of over 80%, maybe 88% or so, of women wanting to exit. But how do you decide that you're going to let the abusive person who is benefiting off the sale of this human being? How do we even think about, under a full decriminalization or legalization kind of, world, where we just simply say either we're not going to have laws on the books that, prosecute, so you got brothels popping up next door to daycare, centers, and in your own residential buildings, because that's what, that means. You can just have a brothel anyway. Or legalization where you have the zoned brothels, but that's not working in the Netherlands. It's not working. Legalization isn't working in Germany. They're working very hard not to have legalization there anymore. It didn't work. It's not working in those few counties in Nevada. We're talking 50 plus years for a failed science experiment. I'm on my soapbox now, I know, but it's a failed science experiment in the brothels in Nevada. Plenty of research. Mari, we put our partners out there in Nevada that have done all that work. And so with the equality model, which is partial decriminalization, decriminalize the sex, the seller of sex, provide exit services when they're ready, but you maintain the penalty on the exploited, the person that's benefiting from this. Okay, that includes the buyer, the brothel owner, the buyer, brothel owner, pimp, and trafficker. Yeah. Because we can't reward, and we can't let them off the hook for the violence that they perpetrate on a daily basis on women and children, the LGBTQ community. However a person identifies, and they, and like the trans community, people in the trans community feel like they can't meet their basic needs by any other way. That's just not right. That's just not right. People should have healthy choices, options that make them feel respected, have dignity, and not feel that their body is the only option. Now, if that's the option they choose, that's the option that they choose. But it should never be the only option. And statistics and research tells us that most people would choose something else if it were offered. But it has to be long-term, can be short-term, it has to be long-term. People have to put some skin in the game, and that means money, so that there's everything that's got to be comprehensive services. And guess who should pay for it? those who are benefiting, you got to build a restorative justice model that in some way, whether it be fines or penalties, you know, at arrest or whatever it happens to be, definitely I think it should not just go to, I think those fines and penalties should not just go to services, but I think they should go to law enforcement as well to increase their capacity to go after the demand. Because there are jurisdictions that would like to do more demand-focused work, but they need their capacity to do so increased, so they need more money. One of the things that's made me very happy recently, and then I think it's time for us to go to our questions, is Texas being the first state in the country to make buying a human being a felony. That was just like, thank you, God. That was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And knowing so many of the people who worked so hard to make that happen, it was just amazing. It's a great accomplishment on behalf of that state. So I think we can move on to the questions, and I can, you know, pull any other thoughts together at the end here, and give people a chance to put their thoughts out there.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. Yeah, we've had, I think actually everyone's done a great job of putting questions in the Q&A. I think in the chat, several people have put links to different websites.
Okay.
And all of those websites, I know the websites I dropped in have a lot of research articles. And then looks like Jess also added some in as well, and some PDFs and research reports. So thank you very much, Jess. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this question came in actually right at the beginning. And this attendee was wondering, what do you mean by the word abolitionist in the context that you were using it?
Well, the pure feminist, I mean, if you go back, an abolitionist that you would probably recognize would be like Harriet Tubman, someone who was abolishing slavery in the original idea of when chattel slavery moved from like England over here. And so Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist. Sojourner Truth is an abolitionist. And so those are examples of an abolitionist. The abolitionist that wants to not only reduce, you know, erode, but abolish the human rights violation that is human trafficking.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that Wolf, we are a feminist abolitionist organization because we completely oppose prostitution as well. So we have had a few comments from people who I'm guessing are pro-prostitution. So I'm going to skip over those. But I do think we might have a couple of questions. Marian, let me know if you want to answer this, but a couple of people with similar questions wondering about violence in brothels, because we know that the pro-prostitution crowd will say, as long as it's a legal brothel or, you know, a decriminalized brothel in Nevada, then there's not going to be any violence there because those women are choosing that line of work. So from your experiences and people you've worked with and research, what do we know about violence in legal brothels?
It exists. There's still violence in legal brothels.
Yeah.
It's just, it is. I mean, if anybody watches as many crime shows as I do and knows as much about this sort of thing, even I was surprised that they actually had one of my shows there. That. All right, Jess. I'm gonna leave it right there. Good comment, Jess. There was actually I think it was a serial killer that was caught that was involved with one of the brothels down there. But also, if you think about the Green River Killer, you know, and a lot of people, there's been actually a serial killer, a couple of serial killers in Seattle area, serial killer in Indiana area close to me. And he was Black, because usually, you know, people think statistically serial killers are white, but the gentleman I'm talking about that was, and I use it very loosely, he was a African-American man, Black man, in Indiana, and they hunted him. Green River Killer and others, they hunt the vulnerable, you know, because they're on the street. And there was another one, I don't know if he was ever caught, somewhere in the Southwest. I don't know, was it Arizona or no, maybe New Mexico. There was a serial killer that was hunting prostituted women. And so, you know, it's just look at us like trash, you know, like we're just disposable. And it's just not acceptable. And the violence is, she said, I mean, I'm assuming it's a she, but the men who buy sex are doing, they're doing things that they cannot do at home. Okay, let's just call it what it is. These are things they cannot do with their wives or their girlfriends at home. They don't even want them to know these are things that they want to explore. And I'm just going to add more to it. So much of the violence is fueled by pornography, because when I was growing up, they had what was called quote unquote soft porn. It has gotten rougher and rougher and more violent, to the point where you have 15-year-old young men who can't get an erection nowadays. And I've had them talk to me without watching porn at their age. That is because the socialization that they're experiencing is that violence is associated with sex, and their sense of intimacy is completely distorted and forever screwed up, which of course is going to bleed over into their family dynamics when and if they partner with someone.
Yeah, and it's so terrifying to think about how these guys, they're getting addicted to watching this violence, right? So it's completely associated, like you said, that link in their brains now. So I know you talked about this, but sometimes people still struggle with understanding the differences between decriminalizing something and legalizing something. And so that's what someone wrote in. Can you just give like a brief explanation between decriminalization and legalization?
So to decriminalize, fully decriminalize means there's no regulation. Okay, there's no statute to arrest buyers. There's no statute, thanks, Jess. There's no statute to arrest buyers. There's no statute to arrest the seller. There's no statute to arrest the brothel owner and, you know, pimps. They can just, everybody, it's just like a wild, wild west. Just call it what it's going to be. Wild, wild west. And like I said, that's a scenario where you can have a brothel in your apartment building and they can't do anything about it. And you can't even call the police because there's no statute at that point to enforce. And so that's something to really think about. We're not talking about, you know, out in the middle of nowhere. We're talking about, you know, cities, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, you know, this is not what you want for your family. Trust me. And I'm just trying to, you know, keep it kind of narrow. I think you dropped the equality model.us. Okay, people can go there for more specific descriptions, but legalization is regulated. Okay, legalization is regulated is what you would imagine it was supposed to be in Germany and what it's supposed to be in those few counties in Nevada. The problem is they were supposed to be able to, they were supposed to pay they were supposed to pay taxes. They're supposed to, healthcare, all these things. This stuff did not happen. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Murray. Germany, it didn't happen. They wouldn't be trying to get rid of it. They wouldn't be trying to get rid of it if it worked. And not only that, you increase the demand when you make it okay. Now you got to bring people from other places because you can't meet the demand. So what happens then?
Yeah,
trafficking goes through the roof.
Yep, I think that was really surprising for a lot of people who had thought legalization would somehow going to end sex trafficking, and what these countries found is that it increases sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So someone just typed in a question, which I'm gonna look over real quick. In the meantime, a couple of people mentioned in the chat that survivors really need support in order to escape and exit.
Right.
What kind of ongoing support would you say survivors need to successfully leave prostitution and stay out of it so they don't return?
Well, first of all, it can take a number of times. What survivors first and foremost need is they need their to be able to move into a place of safety. The first thing they need is to feel safe. I've had a number of women, once they felt safe, even in a jail-based treatment setting, even in a treatment modality that was outside of the jail walls, once they felt safe, they made a decision to go after their trafficker, even when they didn't have to. They didn't, I mean, the case could have been made without them, but they wanted to be a part of that process in certain situations. I personally prefer us starting to lean on artificial intelligence and more technology to build prosecutions, and so that victims are never their backbone, or they're not the backbone, rather, or the necessary glue to make a case. But once women and others involved in this get safe and realize there is something different, and that they don't have to look behind their back, and and they don't jump at every noise anymore, and that they know their children are safe and well taken care of, and that they can have nice things, and they can go to school, and they can have what they want, not what someone decided that they're going to have, which is what so many have lived through. So safety, and they need as many chances as we'll give them. Some don't get it the first time. Some don't get it the 5th time. Some don't get it the 10th. What they need to know is that anytime that phone's going to ring, someone's going to be on the other end to answer it. And they're going to have something tangible to offer. They're going to have a warm, safe environment, not a lot of demands. Work with them, meet them where they're at, help them understand what it means to make a plan, make progress, meet some goals, take it at the pace that they are that they see that they can actually do this thing. And when they fall, that they don't feel like somehow they can't pick that phone up again. That's not going to do them any good ever. It's not going to help. When we fall, we fall. Everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes when it comes down to this thing right here, especially if you introduce the amount of mental health issues that might be connected to a person's process, or the addiction. I mean, I told you guys at the beginning, I don't know, who was here, who wasn't, but crack cocaine became the most important thing to me in my life. So it was like, left children, left mom. My mother uh, I think was having major surgery the next day. I didn't know if she had made it through the surgery, alive or dead, but the crack told me to go. I had to go.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, sharing some of your story, that you got the a treatment program in jail to help you. And that was my research as well, really showed that, you know, trauma is at the root of a lot of addictions, and then prostitution is traumatizing, and people get trapped in this cycle, right?
And then some people have been, so, you know, when you have the generational exploitation, and sometimes the urban experience, which is why Alive is very important to me right now, because the urban experience, sometimes it doesn't look like traditional trafficking, what you would expect. It is the hustle. It is the hustle. The guys are hustling the drugs, the girls are hustling themselves, and they meet back at the ranch and they chop it up. And so it doesn't look like, you know, what we would say he's a pimp, and, you know, but is he really? They don't necessarily see it that way. We would classify him as such, but is he really? I mean, the urban experience is a bit different. That's a whole nother webinar. But you know, it's really important to be able to look at the big picture, but also the pieces of the big picture, because it's all not, we already know, you know, we've already, hopefully, most people know it doesn't look like, what's that movie? Oh, goodness. Taken.
Taken.
Not Taken. Not Taken.
I think we still have a lot of, we have a lot of people around the world still struggling, right? Because they think if there's not someone in handcuffs or tied up, then that person must truly be choosing it. And those are even a couple of comments I've seen come in Q&A, you know.
Well, you know, the thing about that too is when there is choice, when did you're deciding who is deciding that they want to do this, right? Who is deciding that they want to do this? Someone who comes from privilege, who has other options. And you cannot buy consent. The Palermo protocols tell us that. You cannot buy consent. We have one of the most wonderful documents. I mean, the Palermo protocols have been so lost. And I'm an idealist who believes it can become real. And that's why I do what I do, right? It is truly heartbreaking to think that someone would really think about having a curriculum on how to teach children on how to provide a hand job or a blow job or this job, or how far have we come where we were, you know, sex education was just sex education when I was a little girl, right? In terms to kind of teach you how to make babies, right? Now we want to teach people how to sell themselves in their formative years, instead of teaching boys and girls to respect each other, boys and girls that, you know, relationships don't cause harm, they don't hurt, it doesn't feel bad, it is a, you know, that intimacy and relationship is special, and that they are priceless, and that their virginity and their body does not have a barcode. It is not something that you can put a price on, and it should not be something that you can put a price on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think our culture has really we've regressed so far. All the so-called sex positivity and all that propaganda, that's the opposite of what it really is.
Right.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions. And one question that came in, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but to ask you, you talked about the support, a lot of like, especially the emotional support survivors need. What do survivors of prostitution need from law enforcement? How should law enforcement be treating survivors when they encounter them?
Well, first of all, law enforcement, from my experience, was well trained and gender responsive. Okay, and they got it. They understood that the person that they looked at the person as a human being and not as an automatic, criminal person that was out there just because they want to be, and that, drug addict or whatever, figure, just pick one, right? But law enforcement by itself is kind of a narrow, that we're looking at it through a narrow lens. What worked for me is the multidisciplinary approach. Okay. You have to have an MDA type of approach when it comes down to, in my opinion, to really help any broken part of society. And this one especially. You have to have, what worked for us is that we had police working with social workers, working with survivors, working with clinical, working with mental health, treatment. I mean, you had treatment staff, you had everybody, including security at the jail. I mean, down to almost the janitor. You had everybody. You had everybody at the table. You had everybody at the table. And one life with all of those people caring and contributing can show them that importance, can show them the beauty that they should be living, that they're worthwhile, that they're not something to be used and abused and tossed aside. And they have options. But you can't get to the point where you have options if you don't have those baby steps, those milestones. You have to have milestones to say, wow, I could really do this. Okay, so I made this first one. The first step might just be staying clean for 30 days or one day. The second step might be, taking a parenting class. The third step for me, when I first, and I know we're coming, down to the wire here, but I want to go back a little bit. When I first came out of the fog, the stupor of being high pretty much 24/7, when I was missing for that almost 2 years, numbing myself from the pain and the guilt and the shame of my journey, I was like a little baby, like I used to say, like a bird in your hand. And if you squeeze me, I would just, crack it. You could have just killed me. I was just happy. I had a college education, 17 years in the corporate sector, 3 major corporations, used to have a staff of, oh gosh, how many people was it? Like 20 something people. I was responsible for intercompany accounting, cash accounting, Medicare cost reporting, special projects, accounts payable, all this stuff, right? But when I came out of that drug-induced fog and that trauma nightmare, I was happy folding brochures. It brought me such purpose. When I was released and I went back, when I got released on a Friday and I went back to volunteer on the Monday and I never left. And then I ended up getting hired and the rest. At first they had me folding brochures and I was okay with that. I was happy. I mean, I felt very fulfilled. I had a person that gave, was really wonderful to me. She was my big sister, Lisa Cunningham, and I was very fulfilled folding brochures because it gave me something positive that I was doing. As I got back to myself, then of course I turned back and I started getting back on the computer and started remembering things that I had forgotten, and it all came second nature after. But it took time. It took like maybe from November to June before I started becoming that. Oh, wait a minute. Y'all need to hire me because I'm gonna have to get a job. I'm gonna have to, I started turning to her again. But they loved me. They loved on me. They were compassionate, caring. You gotta have all of the practical things to help a person get their life on track, whether that means to build for the first time if they've never had it, or to rebuild and reinvent. But there's always it's not one size fits all. It's one of the mottos that I learned early on. And it's just, you gotta care. You have to give a crap. You gotta care about a human being. You gotta care about people.
Yeah. I think actually, since we're just about at time, I think well, I did want to ask if you, in the last 4 minutes, speaking of caring about people, because I think we've all gotten that message from you tonight. Like, that's at the heart of the equality model response, caring about people. What would be your advice for anyone who is watching this, who is in this, this line of work, like victim advocacy or law enforcement or social work or anything where they are trying to help survivors? What's your advice to them for taking care of themselves and, protecting their own health and practicing self-care?
Well, one of the things that was really good for me early on when I was first hired, after the volunteering and then hired as a contractual employee before being made a full-fledged sheriff's office employee, was a workshop that a good friend of mine, she's now a really good friend of mine, colleague, Dr. Kenya Key, did on compassion fatigue. And it is something that, even though I didn't always remember to practice those principles, or wasn't always aware that, maybe falling into a danger zone because the needs were so many. I've been on medical leave for over 2 years now. And when the noise stopped and, Marian had time to look at what Marian needed and what was broken physically and what was broken, all the different things. I mean, I'm a breast cancer survivor, 8 years. I have multiple sclerosis, has moved from relapse remitting to progressive. I have many other things. I have, like, I'm a survivor, a lot of stuff. But in the end, one of the things that I realized was that I can't help other people if I'm not giving my, self-care. I sucked at self-care, just gonna keep it real. So just really bad at self-care. And so I would just remind everybody in all the disciplines, because everybody needs to be at the table, whatever that model might look like in your city or state or your region of the country or the world. Take good care of yourself. I almost died last year. I had a pulmonary embolism. Yeah, I know. There's like this list of stuff. Last year was a heck of a. I had an eye stroke, and I had I am one of the, always got to be an overachiever. One of 3% of people with MS have seizures. Okay, had my first focal seizures. Like, okay, then I had a pulmonary embolism. It's like, what's that about? But I'm still here. But it's a daily reminder that I have to take care of myself. I do want to end on this. One of the things that happened last year during the struggles was I got to the opportunity, I was asked to testify before the U.S. House Financial Services Committee. And it was an amazing thing. And the ranking member, Republican Patrick McHenry, he's from the north of South Carolina. He's from the East Coast, I can't remember. They contacted me and wanted, because I was talking about, car that I'd bought for not my trafficker, but for my trafficker, another trafficker, because my trafficker wanted me to buy it. Because I still had at that point, the ability to do it. Long story short, my testimony moved him. We wrote a law, Debt Bondage Repair Act. It became a part of the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act in the non-defense section. And it's going to help those who have been exploited, sex trafficking, prostitution survivors, to not be in a stranglehold with their credit and have an opportunity to do great things. And so with that, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Mari, has once again been a privilege. And if anybody wants to send any follow-up questions to Wolf, I'm sure Dr. Irvine will get that to me, and we'll get that to you if we can.
Absolutely. Yes. On that note, and I just dropped the link to an article on the Shared Hope website talking about Dr. Hatcher's work on the Debt Bondage Repair Act, which is significant. It's a huge victory to try to bring, some sort of justice and help for survivors. So I know that I'm very grateful for Dr. Hatcher taking the time and the energy tonight to share her knowledge with us. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined live, as well as thank you to anybody who watches this recorded presentation later. And yeah, if anybody has any follow-up questions or comments for Dr. Hatcher, you can go ahead and just email them to events@womensliberationfront.org, and we can get your questions answered or pass them along to Dr. Hatcher. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and conclude the webinar. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you very much, Dr. Hatcher.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.